enjoyed this quiz on autonomic nervous system. And you know, it's one of the very high yield topics from pharmacology, apart from CNS and antimicrobials. So most of the questions we've tried to put it concept based so that your concepts are strong and clear. So without much intro, let's get into the discussion. So the first question is, all of the following are seen with cholinergic muscarinic receptor stimulation except sweating, rise in blood pressure, bradycardia and urination. So this question is based on the actions of cholinergic system. So what is a mediator for cholinergic system? It is acetylcholine, which is released both at preganglionic as well as postganglionic fibers release acetylcholine. Now, what are the actions of acetylcholine or the cholinergic system? And you know what are the receptors for cholinergic system? You have muscarinic receptors and nicotinic receptors. And muscarinic you have M1, M2, M3, M4, M5. And nicotinic you have NM receptors and NN receptors. So now we'll see what are the actions of acetylcholine and then we'll see the answer to this question. So you can see from top to bottom, you remember like that. What is the action in the eye? In the eye, the cholinergic innervation is on the sphincter pupillae. Okay, so that when sphincter pupillae contracts, it causes miosis. Okay, so that is the action in the eye. And then comes the lacrimal gland, your salivary gland. All the glands, it increases the secretion. So it causes lacrimation, it causes salivation, gastric gland secretion is increased. So all the glands, it increases secretion. So in the eye, which receptors are present on the sphincter pupillae as well as on the ciliary muscle? It is the M3 receptor. Similarly, on the glands also, it is the M3 receptor that is present. So after the eye glands, next we come to the bronchus. So bronchus, remember, all the smooth muscles, it causes contraction. Okay, and that is again mediated by the receptor M3 receptors. Okay, so it causes bronchoconstriction, and similarly in the GI muscles also it increases the peristalsis by causing the contraction of the muscles. And similarly on the detrusor muscle also it causes contraction and it is a nerve of voiding. Parasympathetic nerve is a nerve of voiding or it helps in urination. Okay, so that is with the bronchus. And next we come to the heart. In the heart, you know, parasympathetic or the cholinergic is causing decrease in heart rate, and that is mediated by which receptor? That is your M2 receptor mediates are present in the heart, and that decreases the heart rate, force of contraction. Okay, and next we come to the blood vessel. So the important thing about blood vessel is blood vessel contains the endothelium of the blood vessels contain M3 receptors, but it does not have any cholinergic innervation. Okay, remember there is no direct cholinergic innervation on the blood vessel, but the endothelium has M3 receptors. So by exogenous method, if these M3 receptors are stimulated, that will release the nitric oxide or endothelium derived relaxing factor, and that causes vasodilatation. Okay, so that is the action on the blood vessel. So that is in summary of the different actions of acetylcholine. So now we come back to the same question. Now it is easy. Which of the following are seen with muscarinic receptor stimulation? The answer is clear. It is rise in blood pressure. It causes bradycardia, it causes urination, it causes sweating. Rise, it causes fall in blood pressure, not rise in blood pressure. Okay. So coming to the next question, here a patient has undergone an abdominal surgery and post-operatively he develops retention of urine, and which of the following drugs can be prescribed? So what drugs given, options given are, you have atropine, betnecol, isoproterenol and phentolamine. So this is a case of non-obstructive urinary retention. So you need a agent that will increase the detrusor contraction and thereby helps in preventing the urinary retention. Okay, so which so you know that we have just seen that the cholinomimetic agents will stimulate the detrusor contraction, relaxes the sphincter tone and helps in urination. So atropine, you know, it is an anticholinergic agent, and it particularly antagonizes the muscarinic receptors, and that causes urinary retention. And one of the contraindication for atropine is in elderly men, where some amount of benign prostatic hypertrophy will be there. So if you give atropine, there is chance for acute urinary obstruction or urinary retention. What is betnacol? It is a directly acting cholinomimetic agent. And isoproterenol is a beta agonist, beta 1 2 agonist. Phendolamine is a non-selective alpha blocker. So the correct option here is betnacol. Betnacol is a selective muscarinic agonist. It particularly acts on the M3 receptors and causes urination, or helps in relieving the postoperative urinary retention. What are the other use of betnacol? Remember the two B's. Betnacol is starting with a B. It is used for two B conditions. That is, one is bowel, the other one is bladder. So you give it for postoperative urinary retention as well as postoperative paralytic ileus. Clear? So that is what we have discussed now. So now we're coming to the next question. An elderly patient comes with a history of progressive impairment of memory and cognitive functions. Which of the following drugs would be best prescribed to the patient? Rivastigmine, neostigmine, pyridostigmine, atropine. So what is the probable diagnosis of this patient? Progressive impairment of memory and cognitive function. So the patient is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. So in Alzheimer's, one of the pathophysiology is there is decreased cholinergic activity. So we try to increase the acetylcholine levels in the brain, okay, to improve the condition. So you can see here, rivastigmine, neostigmine, pyridostigmine all belong to which category? Anticholinesterase, right? Anticholinesterases. So they inhibit the cholinesterase enzyme that degrades acetylcholine. So as a result, there is increased level of acetylcholine. So which one? Atropine is an anticholinergic agent. So which of these agents, all these three agents will increase the acetylcholine. So which one will you prefer for Alzheimer's disease? So we need an agent that crosses the blood-brain barrier, that is easily lipid soluble, so that it can cross the blood-brain barrier and reach the CNS. And the option here is rivastigmine. Okay, it is relatively cerebroselective, whereas neostigmine and pyridostigmine are more peripherally acting. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So you prefer rivastigmine. What are the other agents that you can give for Alzheimer's disease? The other anticholinesterases are donepezil, galantamine, and tacrine. But tacrine is no longer given because of hepatotoxicity. Okay. Whereas neostigmine, pyridostigmine have more of a peripheral action. We give it for conditions like myasthenia gravis or cobra bite, postoperative decolorization, etc. So that is what we have discussed. And next question is, you have prescribed an effective dose of atropine to a patient who has come with OP poisoning, organophosphorus poisoning. So which of the following structures will continue to be overactivated by excess acetylcholine after the atropine is given? Airway smooth muscle, SA node of the heart, salivary and lacrimal glands, and skeletal muscle. So again, what is organophosphorus? You know that anticholinesterases are divided into reversible and irreversible. The reversible agents are what we have seen now, your physostigmine, neostigmine, pyridostigmine, rivastigmine, all are reversible agents. Okay, whereas irreversible ones are mainly we are concerned about poisoning. That is, your organophosphorus, carbamates all come under irreversible carbamates. Okay, irreversible anticholinesterase. So what we do for that? So what happens when you're giving organophosphate, or if there is an organophosphorus poisoning, it will come and combine with anticholinesterases irreversibly, so that what is happening, the acetylcholine levels will be increased. So that is how the manifestations of OP poisoning is happening. So this acetylcholine will act on both muscarinic receptors and nicotinic receptors. So what do we give for OP poisoning? The drug of choice is anticholinergic agent. That is, atropine is the drug of choice for OP poisoning. Okay, you have learned about the signs of atropinization and all. So atropine is an anti-muscarinic agent. It mainly blocks the muscarinic effects of the acetylcholine. It does not have any effect on the nicotinic effects of acetylcholine. So which among these options it is mediated by nicotinic receptors? It's clear on the smooth muscles, on the SA node, salivary lacrimal gland, you have muscarinic receptors. It's on the skeletal muscle, you have nicotinic NM receptors. So skeletal muscle overactivity will not be counteracted even after you give atropine. Okay. Now, what is the other agent that you can give to counter the or overcome the effect of anticholinesterases on skeletal muscle? You can give oximes. Oximes like pralidoxime, obidoxime can be prescribed. So as we have just mentioned about these oximes, just a word about how these oximes act. Okay, so you can see here, this is how acetylcholine is there. It comes and binds, it is getting degraded by acetylcholinesterase enzyme. And this acetylcholinesterase enzyme has got two sites. There is an esteratic site and there is an anionic site. So when reversible anticholinesterases like physostigmine, neostigmine and all, it resembles this acetylcholine. So it comes and binds with uh, acetylcholinesterase enzyme and block it so that the acetylcholine levels increases. Whereas in case of organophosphorus compounds, it comes and binds only to the esteratic site. The anionic site is free. Okay, so in such case, when we administer oximes, oximes will come and uh, place here, and it forms a bond with the OP compound, so that after its binding, what happens? Remember, this is oxime is attached along with organophosphorus, and your anticolin, okay, I'm not good in drawing, the anticholinesterase enzyme is getting free. So the oxime will take its organophosphates along with it. Okay, so this, and you should give it immediately, because once the enzyme undergoes aging, then it cannot be reactivated. The acetylcholinesterase cannot be reactivated with the help of oximes. Okay, and mainly oximes are indicated in case of muscle weakness as well as for respiratory depression. And remember, it is effective only in OP poisoning, not in carbamate poisoning, because in carbamate poisoning, this site, the anionic site, is not free, so that the oximes can attach. The next question is an image question. The plant shown in the figure is a source of morphine, atropine, quinine, digoxin. So this image that is shown is a plant named Atropa belladonna. Okay, and all these drug sources are important ones, which you can just Google and see the images. Now recently all these image based questions, especially for source of drugs, have been asked, and there is an interesting story behind how this Atropa belladonna got its name. It is from the Greek, one of the Greek goddesses of fate. There are three Greek goddesses of fate, like Atropos, Clothos, and Lachesis. Atropos is the third goddess. You can see she is cutting a thread with the scissors. So it is believed that this is the goddess that determines how long the person should live and what is the mechanism of his death. So he named it because atropine was used in ancient times for poisoning. Okay, and that is why this Atropos, the name was derived from this goddess. And Belladonna is an Italian word that means beautiful. So those times they used this juice of this berry to dilate the eyes, and it was considered that dilated eyes are a sign of beauty. Okay, so it is from which the Carl Linnaeus named it as Atropa belladonna, commonly known as deadly nightshade. Okay. So next question is, a patient diagnosed with psychosis is on treatment with haloperidol for the past 1 month. She has developed rigidity, tremors and hypokinesia. Which of the following drugs would you prescribe to this patient? Levodopa, pilocarpine, trihexyphenidyl and physostigmine. So what is this patient? You can see that the patient is on treatment for haloperidol. Okay, so patient is a schizophrenic patient on typical antipsychotic. Haloperidol is a typical antipsychotic. And what did she develop after after 1 month of treatment? She developed rigidity, tremors, and hypokinesia. So that is a classical feature of what? Parkinsonism. Okay. So why this happened in the first place? Haloperidol, as I told earlier, it's a typical antipsychotic. How does it act? By blocking the D2 receptors. So the D2 receptors are present. So many dopamine pathways are there. There is a mesocortical pathway, mesolimbic pathway, nigrostriatal pathway, and tuberoinfundibular pathways are there. So the schizophrenia or the psychosis, the positive symptoms are because of activation of the mesolimbic pathway. The negative symptoms are because of underactivity of the mesocortical activity of the pathway, and the nigrostriatal pathway is connecting to the basal ganglia. So by blocking the D2 receptors here, what happens? There is decreased dopamine in the basal ganglia, and that results in a series of side effects known as extrapyramidal side effects. That is very, very important. Another very high yield topic is typical antipsychotics and these extrapyramidal side effects. And one such extrapyramidal side effect is Parkinsonism. And you all know Parkinsonism is due to deficiency of dopamine. Okay, so that is what has happened. The patient has taken haloperidol, and after 1 month, he developed Parkinsonism because of D2 blocking in the nigrostriatal pathway. So what can we give here? Can we give levodopa or should we give some other agents? Okay, so you know in Parkinsonism there are two neurotransmitters that is involved. One is dopamine, another one is acetylcholine. So there is deficiency of dopamine and there is cholinergic overactivity. So this is a basic pathophysiology of um, Parkinsonism. So we mainly target to increase the dopamine levels by giving drugs like levodopa or other directly acting dopamine agonist, or by inhibiting the metabolism of dopamine and all. Another strategy for treating this is by decreasing this cholinergic overactivity. So we'll see in this case what can we do. So you can see here, normally what happens, the dopamine will come and bind with the receptors D1 and D2. But in case of idiopathic Parkinsonism, there is dopamine deficiency. So if you give levodopa, it gets converted into dopamine and it can come and bind. But in case of drug-induced Parkinsonism, these receptors are already blocked. Okay, so drugs like haloperidol or metoclopramide and all, these receptors are already blocked. So even if you give levodopa, it won't be able to act on these receptors because these receptors are already blocked by drugs like haloperidol or other phenothiazines or metoclopramide. So then the only other method by which you can treat this patient is by decreasing the cholinergic overactivity. So for that you give centrally acting anticholinergics, and example of centrally acting anticholinergics is benzhexol, trihexyphenidyl and all. Okay, so which is the answer here? The drug of choice for haloperidol induced Parkinsonism, the answer is trihexyphenidyl. The next question is, a patient has come to you with history of urge incontinence and frequent urination. Which of the following drugs will you prescribe to relieve these symptoms? So if you know which group these drugs belong to, you will be able to answer. You know, carbachol, betnacol, pilocarpine, what is common among all them? All of them, they are all directly acting cholinomimetic agents. And you know, cholinomimetic agents will act on the M3 receptors and will cause detrusor contraction. So here the patient is having urge incontinence. So we need an agent that will relax the hyperactive detrusor muscle. So you need to give anticholinergic, vesicoselective anticholinergic agent, and the option that is given here is oxybutynin. So you need to know which are the other vesicoselective anticholinergic agents. So here mainly by reducing the detrusor contraction, it will increase the bladder capacity and reduces the frequency of bladder contraction. So these are the other vesicoselective anticholinergic agent you can remember by the mnemonic soft bladder. S for solifenacin, O for oxybutynin, F for flavoxate as well as fesoterodin, T for tolterodin and tropsium, and bladder DAR for darifenacin. So here the longest acting one is solifenacin. Oxybutynin is the shortest acting. Longest acting is solifenacin, shortest is oxybutynin. And maximum risk of dry mouth is for oxybutynin. And remember, tropsium has got minimum CNS penetration. So the significance is there is less cognitive effects with tropsium. Okay. Another newer agent which is not an anticholinergic but recently approved for this overactive bladder is mirabegron, which is a beta-3 agonist. So this is a new drug, mirabegron. It has been recently asked in one of the exams. Okay, so remember, soft bladder. You make the bladder soft so that it relaxes and helps in urge incontinence. Okay. So we go to the next one. A 13-year-old boy is brought to the emergency by his brother, and he describes the patient behavior as extreme drunkenness, laughing loudly, unable to speak coherently, hallucinating, catching at invisible objects, and on examinations the skin is flushed, dry, temperature is 100, pulse is 90, and which of the following drugs will be life-saving? So first you have to know what is this condition. So 13-year-old boy with acute onset of these symptoms, most probably it's a case of poisoning. So next question comes, what does all these symptoms point to? Which poisoning? So there is drunkenness, laughing loudly, unable to speak coherently, hallucinating. There is some sort of psychosis is there, right? And then the skin is dry, there is flushed or peripheral vasodilatation is there. There is increased temperature or fever is there. Pulse tachycardia is there. Okay. So all this point to atropine poisoning or belladonna poisoning, which is an anticholinergic poisoning. So what can we give for that? Cholinomimetic agent or cholinergic agent. And the drug of choice for atropine poisoning is physostigmine. Okay. And why we prefer physostigmine over neostigmine in case of atropine poisoning? Because physostigmine can cross the blood-brain barrier and counteract the central effects of atropine, like psychosis. So here you can see how to remember the symptoms or signs of atropine poisoning. This is the mnemonic that we use: dry as a bone. Why dry? Because of anticholinergic. So it decreases all the secretions. Okay, sweating, everything is decreased. Blind as a bat because of mydriasis, there is blurring of vision. Red as a beet because of cutaneous vasodilatation. So here the patient was flushed. Hot as a hair. You know, when you touch a hair is something like a rabbit. You can see there is increased temperature. So here there is increased temperature because the sweat glands and all are decreased sweating, and that can lead to increase in temperature. And mad as a wet hen, basically referring to your atropine psychosis. Okay, so you have to take care of all the general measures plus the specific antidote is physostigmine. Okay. Now next question is, one of the following activities is not mediated through beta 2 adrenergic receptors, that is stimulation of lipolysis, increased hepatic gluconeogenesis, increased muscle glycogenolysis, smooth muscle relaxation. So this is a direct question about the actions of adrenergic system and which is mediated through beta 2 receptors. So adrenergic receptors, you know, it is divided into alpha receptors and beta receptors. Alpha receptors, again, there is alpha 1 and alpha 2, right? And beta, you have beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. Remember, we have one heart, so beta 1 is present in the heart. Rest all the areas, like we have two lungs, so on the lungs, on the blood vessels, everywhere else, on the GI, on the bladder, you have beta 2, and beta 3 is mainly present in the adipose tissue. Okay, so here beta 3 is involved in lipolysis. So the answer here is the stimulation of lipolysis is mediated via beta 3. All others are mediated via beta 2. And alpha 1, it is mainly present in the eyes. Again, it is present in the blood vessels, also on the bladder neck. And alpha 2 is mainly presynaptic. It acts like a brake, like an autoreceptor. It decreases the release of noradrenaline. And some places it is present postsynaptically also, like blood vessels and in the brain. So this is where these receptors are present. And I just would like to tell you about what are the different actions of sympathetic system. Just remember this diagram. Imagine a dog is coming barking at you. Which system will be activated? Your fear, fright mechanism is mediated via your adrenergic system. So if you remember this picture, you will be able to tell all the actions of adrenergic system. So right from the eyes, remember you want to see the dog clearly. So the eyes will be dilated. Okay, that's the way I remember. That is, there is mydriasis, and that is mediated via alpha 1 receptors that are present on the dilator pupillae. So that contracts, there is mydriasis. And then next, coming to the glands. Glands, remember, all the gland secretions are reduced. You know, cholinergic, there is increased secretions. So adrenergic, there is decreased secretion. But here when you're running, there is sweating. And the exception is sweating. And why there is sweating? You know, all the, in the adrenergic system, sympathetic system, all the preganglionic neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Postganglionic, everywhere it is noradrenaline except in few places. One exception is at the sweat glands. Sweat glands, it is acetylcholine that is released even when there is sympathetic stimulation. So this acetylcholine will act on the M3 receptors and causes sweating. So then we come down to the bronchus. So bronchus, you're running, you need more air to get in. So there is bronchodilation, and that is mediated via beta 2 because we have two lungs, so beta 2. And then we come to the heart. Adrenaline on the heart, you know, when you're running, there is increased heart rate, increased cardiac output, increased force of contraction and all. And on the heart, we have beta 1. We have one heart, so beta 1 is present in the heart. And then where else? Okay, on the GIT and on the GUT. So when you are running, you should not defecate, you should not urinate. So it causes the bladder relaxation as well as it decreases the peristalsis. It increases the tone of the sphincters but the smooth muscle relaxation. Okay. Next is on the blood vessels. What happens to the blood vessels? Okay. Blood vessels, there is a contradiction. Alpha 1 will cause vasoconstriction and beta 2 will cause vasodilatation. So what happens when adrenaline or adrenergic system is stimulated? Both these receptors will be activated. So whether vasoconstriction predominates or vasodilatation predominates depends upon which receptors are more in that particular tissue. So how to remember which receptors are more? For example, when you're running, which of your organs need more blood? Your skeletal muscle and your heart requires more blood. So both skeletal muscle and heart, your beta 2 mediated vasodilatation is more prominent. So both skeletal muscle as well as coronaries, there is vasodilatation, whereas your skin, splanchnic tissue and all, it is alpha 1 that is more predominant, that causes vasoconstriction. And then you need energy for running, so it increases the glucose level, it increases the lipolysis. So glucose levels can be increased either by lysing the glycogen, that is glycogenolysis, or increasing the gluconeogenesis. Both are mediated via beta 2, and there is alpha 2 mediated decreased secretion of the insulin also. So that is what are the main actions, and then you have some miscellaneous actions, like it causes hypokalemia, initially hyperkalemia, but then there is uptake by the skeletal muscle, so it produces hypokalemia, as well as in the skeletal muscle there may be tremor because of beta 2 stimulation. So this picture you remember, you can remember the actions of adrenergic system. So now we come to the next question. An unknown drug is being tested in experimental setup. The results obtained are given in the table, and what is a new drug? So you can see here, this is a new drug and this is a placebo treated. You can see the heart rate has increased, the systolic BP has increased, diastolic BP has decreased compared with the control, and the tremor is present. So before we go into this question, we'll just briefly see what are the effects of the sympathetic drugs on, or what determines the systolic BP, diastolic BP and heart rate, and then we'll come back to this question so that it is easy for you. So you know, the systolic BP is mainly determined by the heart rate, and that is, on the heart we have beta 1 receptor. So if a agent has action on beta 1, your systolic BP will be increased. Diastolic BP is mainly dependent upon the peripheral vascular resistance, that is whether it is vasoconstricted or vasodilated, and that is mainly dependent on two receptors, that is alpha 1 and beta 2. If alpha 1, you know, it is resulting in vasoconstriction, and beta 2 causes vasodilatation. So mean BP, depending upon which one is more predominant, mean BP may be either increased or decreased. Coming to the heart rate, direct action is there by acting on, if there is a beta 1 action, plus there is a reflex action also. So what is a reflex action? Reflex action is basically dependent on your diastolic BP. That is, if there is increased diastolic BP, okay, what happens? It stimulates the baroreceptor mediated response, and that will cause decreased heart rate. Wherever there is decreased diastolic BP, what happens? There is increased central sympathetic outflow and there is increased heart rate. So when DBP, there is fall, there is reflex increase in heart rate. When there is increase in DBP, there is a reflex decrease in heart rate. So if this concept is clear, then you will know what is the action of adrenaline, noradrenaline and isoprenaline. So adrenaline acts on all the receptors, alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. So what will be the action on systolic BP? Because beta 1 action is there, systolic BP is increased. What happens on the diastolic BP? Alpha 1 action is there, but beta 2 will cause fall. Alpha 1 causes vasoconstriction, beta 2 will cause fall. So diastolic BP, there is not much change. Mean BP is increased because systolic BP is increased. Heart rate is increased mainly because of the direct action on the beta 1. Okay. Now next we come to noradrenaline. So noradrenaline has, okay, one second. Noradrenaline, important thing is it does not have beta 2 action. Okay, it has alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 3 action. So systolic BP will increase. Diastolic BP, there is no beta 2 action, only alpha 1 is it. So diastolic BP will also increase. Mean BP will increase. What happens to the heart rate? Heart rate, direct beta 1 increase is there, but diastolic BP, you can see here, the diastolic BP is increased, so there is reflex decrease in heart rate. So that is more prominent than the direct beta 1 mediated increase. So net heart rate is decreased. Okay, so if you are given a question like a given drug X will increase the systolic BP, increase the diastolic BP, but decreases the heart rate, then you should think about noradrenaline. Okay. Now, isoprenaline has no alpha action, only beta action, beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. So, systolic BP will increase because of beta 1 action. Diastolic, there is decrease in BP because of beta 2 mediated, but more prominent is the effect of diastolic BP. So, the net BP will fall, the mean BP will fall, and whenever there is DBP fall, there is baroreceptor activation and there is increase in heart rate. So, this is a condition where the BP falls and heart rate increases. So that is an example of how isoprenaline acts on the BP. So now we come back to the question. So here you can see the heart rate is increased. So that is beta 1 action, and we don't know what is the effect on diastolic BP. Systolic BP is again increased, again because of beta 1. Diastolic BP has decreased. Okay, so diastolic BP to be decreased, it should be mediated via beta 2, because diastolic BP is by alpha 1 and beta 2. Alpha 1 will cause increase in DBP, so beta 2 will cause decrease in BPP, and tremor is also present, which is beta 2 mediated, presence of beta 2 receptors on the skeletal muscle. So here it is beta 1 and beta 2 agonist. So that is how you get the answer. Coming to the next question, tachyphylaxis is associated with the following. It's a direct question. If you know, it's easy. It's indirectly acting sympathomimetic agents. So what happens is, what is tachyphylaxis? It is another word for acute tolerance. Okay. So when we are giving a drug at short intervals, there is gradual decrease in response. So this phenomenon is what is known as tachyphylaxis, and it is mainly seen with indirectly acting agents like tyramine, amphetamine, ephedrine, methylphenidate and all. And why it shows this phenomenon is, these drugs mainly act by, you can see this is a synapse. So the noradrenaline that is released is taken up by a transporter, and then they are stored within the synaptic vesicles. So these agents get transported with the same transporter as that of noradrenaline, and what it does is it comes here and displaces noradrenaline from its synaptic vesicle. So when you're repeatedly giving tyramine in short intervals, the stores get depleted, and as a result, the action or the response decreases. That is a major mechanism by which tachyphylaxis is seen. There are other reasons, other mechanisms, like there is slow dissociation from the receptor side, or there may be down regulation or desensitization of the receptors, but mainly it is the stores getting depleted because these are indirectly acting sympathomimetic agents. Next question is, dopamine is preferred in treatment of shock. Again, this is a very important concept. We know dopamine is a agent that acts on D1, D2 receptors, alpha 1 and beta 1 receptors. And at 3 doses, it has 3 actions. So here, it is preferred in shock because of its renal vasodilatory effect, so that it maintains the GFR. So this is important. At low doses, it mainly stimulates the dopamine and causes dilatation of the renal vessels and maintains the GFR. Moderate doses 2 to 10 microgram per kilogram per minute. It has main action on the beta 1, causes increased heart rate, and high doses about 10 microgram per kilogram per minute. It mainly acts on the alpha 1 and causes vasoconstriction. And this is again a direct question. Dexmedetomidine is a centrally acting alpha 2 agonist, and we use it mainly as a sedative in intubated patients in ICUs as well as as a pre-anesthetic medication because it reduces the requirement of analgesics. Now, sibutramine is indicated for, it is another sympathomimetic agent which we use for obesity. It's an anorectic agent, okay, which reduces your craving, and it acts by inhibiting the reuptake of both noradrenaline and serotonin and has thermogenesis effect also. But once you discontinue this treatment, the weight regaining is seen, and all the anoretic agents have been banned because of their association with cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. Even sibutramine has got a black box warning. The other agents like fenfluramine and all has been banned. And mainly we advise surgery like bariatric surgery when the BMI is more than 40 kilogram per meter square, or if there is more than 35 kilogram per meter square, if the patient has some comorbidities because of obesity, then you may go for bariatric surgery. And pharmacotherapy is initiated when the BMI is more than 30 kilogram per meter square or BMI more than 27 kilogram per meter square if the patient has comorbidities. Okay. Now, which of the following alpha blocker is used in treatment of BPH, benign prostatic hypertrophy, without producing significant hypotension? So you can see all dexamethasone, tamsulosin, terazosin are alpha blockers, and phentolamine is a non-specific alpha blocker. And I hope you know where all are alpha 1 present. The three main sites is, one is in the eye, it causes mydriasis. The other one is in the blood vessels, it causes vasoconstriction. Another one is on the prostate neck. Okay, so here it increases the tone. So by inhibiting this alpha 1 specific blocker, it will reduce the tone of the neck muscles, and that will help in symptomatic relief. The other agent that we use for benign prostatic hypertrophy is finasteride, which is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor that decreases the testosterone levels and thereby decreasing the muscle mass. So here alpha 1 is again divided into alpha 1A and alpha 1B. So 1B is basically present on the blood vessels. So if we are giving an agent that is specifically alpha 1A, there will be less vascular side effects like postural hypotension. The main problem with agents like alpha blockers, selective alpha 1 blockers, the main examples are prazosin, terazosin, doxosin. So the main problem with prazosin and all is first dose hypotension or postural hypotension. Okay, so when you're giving agent that blocks only alpha 1A, there is less vascular side effect, and the drug that blocks specifically 1A with no action on 1B is tamsulosin. So that again has been asked repeatedly. But the main adverse effect is impaired ejaculation. Next question is on beta blocker. A 45-year-old patient came with BP of 150/90 and he was started with propranolol and the heart rate reduced to 48 beats per minute. Which blocker can be used which does not cause bradycardia? This is a hypothetical question because propranolol we don't use these days for hypertension. We use cardioselective blockers. But here what has happened? A patient hypertensive was started on a beta blocker and his heart rate is reduced drastically. So there is severe bradycardia. So which beta blocker can be given that does not produce that much bradycardia? So you need to give an agent that has intrinsic sympathomimetic action or partial agonistic action. So in presence of a full agonist, it will act like an antagonist. In the absence of a agonist, it will act like a agonist. So the main purpose of using this partial agonist is for such patients where there is severe bradycardia on use of beta blockers. When you use agents with intrinsic sympathomimetic activity, there won't be much bradycardia. And the example here is for beta blocker with intrinsic sympathomimetic agent, action is Pintalol. So for beta blockers, when you're studying, please remember which are cardioselective beta blockers, the drugs which has membrane stabilizing activity, the drugs which have intrinsic sympathomimetic activity. So all these are areas of where questions can be asked. So they activate the beta receptors submaximally, and you can remember it by the mnemonic contain partial agonistic activity: celiprolol, pindalol, azibutalol, alpranolol. And we mainly use it in elderly where less bradycardia is preferred, less rebound effect on withdrawal, there is less effect on the blood lipid profile, and it is not effective for migraine or angina. Angina particularly because it has some intrinsic sympathomimetic activity, it can worsen angina. So we don't use it for conditions like angina, but we give it for elderly where there is more chance for bradycardia. Which of the following is a contraindication for beta blocker? You all know what are the beta blocker contraindication. Remember A, B, C, D. A for bronchial asthma, B for block, heart block or severe bradycardia, C for acute compensated heart failure, and D for diabetes. Diabetes mellitus is a relative contraindication. So here the bronchial asthma is the answer because beta blocker, the beta 2 mediated vasodilatation is not happening, so that results in worsening. All the other three are actually uses of beta blocker. So I'm not going into the details of uses of beta blocker. The answer here is bronchial asthma. Next question is again about some of the important beta blockers, individual agents. Esmolol, which of the following is a false statement? So please make sure you notice all these statements. False statement, which of the following are true except, you tend to miss out such points. So esmolol is mainly metabolized in liver. Celiprolol has inherent vasodilatory property. Nebivolol releases nitric oxide, and metoprolol is used in congestive heart failure. So esmolol is metabolized in liver is a wrong answer here. It is metabolized by esterases, and that makes it very short acting. Okay, we use it mainly for acute termination of conditions like PSVT. Okay, celiprolol has inherent vasodilatory activity because of both nitric oxide release. These are the third generation beta blockers which have additional vasodilatory property. So they releases nitric oxide plus it has beta 2 agonistic action also. Both this will cause vasodilation. Nebivolol releases nitric oxide, and metoprolol. Earlier when you used to say beta blockers are given in CHF, you'll be failed. But now we know for stable patients, not acute decompensated, but compensated CHF patients, you start the patient on beta blockers, cardioselective beta blockers, especially carvedilol is preferred, and you start at a low dose, gradually increase the dose. Okay, and it is found to be one of the drugs that improves or prolongs the survival. The other agents being AC inhibitors or ARBs and aldosterone antagonists, because by inhibiting the remodeling that is seen in congestive heart failure, it improves the survival. So esmolol is a cardioselective with no intrinsic sympathomimetic activity and no membrane stabilizing activity. It is metabolized by the plasma esterases and not by liver. Now this is again a direct question. Match the drug and mechanism of action just so that you go through your anti-glaucoma drugs. So we'll just go through which are the drugs that we give for glaucoma, and then we'll come back to this question. So you know this is a lens, and the aqueous humor is secreted by the ciliary epithelium, and it there is two pathway: conventional pathway, that is your trabecular outflow pathway where it is going through the canal of Schlemm, and a minor pathway is the uveoscleral outflow. Okay, so we have here the drug 1 that acts on the sphincter pupillae as well as on the ciliary muscle. Okay, so both these muscles, the receptor present is M3 receptors. So we have miotics that act on both sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscle. Sphincter pupillae, by contracting that, it will help in opening up the trabecular meshwork and increasing the outflow, by which we use in open angle glaucoma, and ciliary muscle also by pulling it helps in angle closure glaucoma. Now next we come to ciliary body. The importance of ciliary body is it has beta 2 receptors, it has carbonic anhydrase, um, and on the blood vessels you have alpha 1 receptor. So alpha agonist, beta blockers and carbonic anhydrase blockers can act on the site 3. And uveoscleral outflow is mainly the only agent that increases the uveoscleral outflow is the prostaglandin analogs, which are the first line drugs for um, glaucoma. Okay, so we have miotics, alpha agonists, beta blockers, and carbonic anhydrase acting on the ciliary body. The prostaglandin analogs acting on the uveoscleral outflow, and adrenaline, which increases the trabecular outflow as such. Not other alpha agonists, but adrenaline increases the trabecular outflow. So you can see here prostaglandin analogs increases the uveoscleral outflow. Beta blockers, by decreasing the beta 2 mediated cyclic AMP production, decreases aqueous production. Alpha agonists like brimonidine decreases the aqueous production. The exception is dipivirfin, which acts by all the three mechanisms. Dipivirfin is a prodrug of adrenaline, which act by all the three mechanisms, but in general, alpha 1 agonist will cause vasoconstriction and decreases aqueous production. Miotics increases the trabecular outflow. Carbonic anhydrase decreases the production. So the answer here is brimonidine, decreasing the aqueous production. Latanoprost is a prostaglandin analog. It acts by increasing the uveoscleral outflow. Pilocarpine is a miotic cholinergic agent which increases the trabecular outflow. Betaxolol is a beta blocker and that decreases the aqueous production. Coming to the last question, that is, apart from the effects shown in the image, light and corneal reflex where present, drug A is likely to be. This you would have done in your UG practicals, that is a rabbit eye experiment. So what can you see here? So this is a control eye, right eye, and the left eye you put the drop in the, making a pouch in the left eye. So what all do you see here? Okay, so there is mydriasis, dilatation of the pupil, and then you can see the light reflex, corneal reflex are present. And what other information is there? Intraocular tension, as you can see here, compared to the control, it is decreased. Okay, so there is mydriasis, there is decrease in intraocular pressure, and the corneal and light reflex is present. So which is possibly the drug A? So before we go into the answer as such, we'll just see what are the drugs that act on the eye that causes miosis and mydriasis. Okay. Okay. So here you can see there are two muscles in the iris. One is the circular muscle and the other one is the radial muscle. Okay. On the circular muscle is innervated, or the sphincter pupillae is innervated by the short ciliary nerve, that is your parasympathetic or cholinergic innervation, and the dilator pupillae is supplied by the sympathetic system. Okay. So dilator pupillae is by sympathetic, and that is alpha 1. Sphincter pupillae is cholinergic, and that is M3 receptors. So now we come to mydriasis. When does mydriasis happen? Mydriasis happens when there is either contraction of dilator pupillae or there is relaxation of sphincter pupillae. So relaxation of sphincter pupillae is when you give anticholinergic agents like atropine. Okay, and contraction of dilator pupillae is by giving alpha 1 agonist. So both these, like phenylephrine. So both these agents produces mydriasis. One is known as active mydriasis. The other one is known as passive mydriasis. Which one will be active mydriasis? Where there is active contraction of muscle, that is by phenylephrine. Okay, whereas atropine, it is passive mydriasis. Clear? Now, what other difference is there between active and passive mydriasis? When you're giving atropine, what happens to the intraocular pressure? Intraocular pressure will either remain normal, or in patients with narrow iridocorneal angle, intraocular pressure can even increase. Whereas phenylephrine is a alpha 1 agonist. Alpha 1 is present on the ciliary blood vessels, and that decreases aqueous production, and the intraocular pressure decreases. Okay. Now what happens to the light reflex? In case of light reflex, in case, that is when you're showing light to the rabbit eye, the pupil contracts, and the contraction is because of contraction of the sphincter pupillae. So when you're given atropine, the sphincter pupillae is relaxed. Okay, so even if you show light, the light reflex will be absent. Whereas in case of phenylephrine, when you're showing the light, the sphincter pupillae is contracting, but because the eye is dilated, you won't be able to recognize it very much. So light reflex will be present, but it will be sluggish. Okay. So that is a main difference between active and passive mydriasis, or mydriasis produced by atropine and phenylephrine. So in elderly, you prefer using phenylephrine as a mydriatic, because in addition, it decreases the intraocular pressure. What happens with meiosis? Meiosis is when there is sphincter pupillae contraction or relaxation of dilator pupillae. The sphincter pupillae contraction is by cholinomimetic agents, like either directly acting or indirectly acting agents, and relaxation of dilator pupillae, it is by alpha adrenergic antagonist or adrenergic neuron blockers, which we don't use it much. So if you're given questions like this, image questions. So first see whether there is meiosis or mydriasis. If there is meiosis, it can be either pilocarpine or physostigmine. Both the features will be present same. That is, light reflex is present, corneal reflex is present, and intraocular pressure is decreased because of improved trabecular outflow. We have seen in the previous slide how miotics improve the outflow. Now, if there is mydriasis, there are two options, either atropine or phenylephrine. So in order to differentiate that, look at the light reflex. If it is present, it is phenylephrine. Absent, it is atropine. Another thing is, look at the intraocular pressure. If it is decreased, further favoring phenylephrine. Atropine, it is either normal or it can be even increased. So here you can see this is adrenaline or sympathomimetic agents like phenylephrine, whereas this is by atropine. If there is no change in the pupil size but only the corneal reflex is absent, then the unknown drug is local anesthetics like lignocaine. A twist can happen. Imagine an unknown drug with pupil size, there is mydriasis, light reflex is present, corneal reflex is absent, intraocular pressure is decreased. So what could drug A be? It is cocaine, because cocaine, we don't use it now as a local anesthetic. Earlier it was used. It's a sympathomimetic agent also. It inhibits the reuptake of noradrenaline. So apart from its local anesthetic action, it has sympathomimetic actions, like it causes mydriasis and decrease in intraocular pressure, just like sympathomimetic agent. Okay. So now you know what is the answer. There is mydriasis, there is decrease in intraocular pressure. Light reflex, corneal reflex is present, The answer is phenylephrine. Okay, so hope you understood, and thank you for listening. Have a nice day.